alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to Alive After Reading. I'm Tim Niederreiter, and with me today is a returning guest from the mists of time, much like the recent interview we did with J. Daniel Sawyer. It's Edward Willett. Welcome back to the program, Ed.
Thanks for having me back.
Oh, it's good to have you back. And you've got a series that's new to me since it's been going for a couple years now, but it's been a little while since we chatted. So tell us a little bit about your work and what you've been up to lately.
Oh, well, lots of things. I am working on the new series, which is called Worldshapers. I also have my own podcast called, believe it or not, The Worldshapers. and I'm currently writer in residence at the Saskatoon Public Library. So I'm working a lot with new writers and developing writers right now. So that's kind of fun, too. Oh,
wonderful. Yeah, that's a little bit of the academic side of things. Maybe not terribly academic. I don't know exactly what that entails.
Well, it's a program they've had a long time there. I think I'm like the 37th or something. And every year they have a writer in residence, and I have an office in the main branch of the Saskatoon Public Library, and I go up. That's about a 2.5-hour drive from here. I'm in Regina, so I go up on Tuesday mornings. I stay over Tuesday night, and I'm in there on Wednesday, all day Tuesday, and then on Wednesday, and writers come in if they have any. I'll look it up to 3,000 words at a time, and I'll take a look at it and mark it up and talk to them about their projects. And I don't know how many I've had so far. I had 7 just this last Tuesday came in to see me. So it's a busy time, but I enjoy talking to other people and trying to help them out with their writing. I didn't have anything like that when I started out. So
oh yeah, it's definitely
a pay it forward thing.
Absolutely, yeah. Giving back to the community of writers, always a good thing to do.
And I get paid too, so there's that.
Oh, there you go. You get something in return too, so that sweeten the deal even further. There you go. So so Worldshapers, both the podcast and the books, are they related to each other, or is it just the title that they share?
Well, a little bit. Worldshapers, the premise is that there's this vast labyrinth, interdimensional labyrinth of shaped worlds, and people that live in them. Shapers, the ones who have shaped these worlds, get to live inside the worlds that they've shaped. So it's a bit like authors living inside the books that they've created. And of course, my character is traveling from world to world. But the Worldshapers, the podcast, came out at about the same time. Worldshaper, the first book in the series, came out in September 2018. And it was the month before that I started the podcast. And what I do is interview other science fiction and fantasy authors. And it's very much focused on the creative process. So how they go about, we talk, of course, about how they got into writing. It's an hour long, so it's a nice leisurely chat. Talk about how they got into writing and got interested in science fiction and fantasy, and then talk about the process from coming up with ideas through the synopsisizing or outlining up through the writing process itself, the revision process, the editing process. And then we also talk about, big philosophical questions. And I always make my voice do that when I say that. Big philosophical question about why we write, because why exactly do we do this? And everybody has a different answer. So I've talked to some really big names in the field. Like it's John Scalzi, Victoria Schwab, David Brin.
Wow, not bad, yeah.
People at that level. Rebecca Roanhorse is the one I'm just will be out this weekend as we're recording this. So it's been great, and I've always loved talking to other writers about their process, and this is an opportunity to do that and then share it with the world.
Well, that's real nice. Yeah, that's kind of similar to the premise of this podcast, but obviously on a slightly higher level. It sounds like actually with the kind of not to diss any of the guests we have on, especially not present company, but I don't attract the higher level guests as far as name recognition at this point.
Well, it's because I've been in the field for a while, and I'm published by one of the major publishers, and I've met people at conventions, and it's just
it's a different network,
yeah. And if you reach out, it's amazing who's willing to say yes. So
yeah, I guess that's probably my issue then. I don't reach out a whole lot. But anyway, enough about my inadequacies as a podcaster. So the funny thing about this Worldshaper series of the books sounds interesting to me is that it's actually, that also sounds similar to a series of books I've been working on for the better part of a decade at this point. It's weird, the parallels that I saw. But anyway, that I just thought it's funny because, like, parallel development, right? Like, I'm not obviously every author does it their own way. And it sounds like there's some major differences I already detected between what I write, the setting I was writing in, and the one you have created here. Well, I mean, just at the press release, I didn't actually read the books yet.
The inspiration, in a way, is a couple of things. I mean, if you go back to the original Star Trek, for example, it was a different world every week, basically. Mm-hmm. And that was a great storytelling premise. And the greatest storytelling premise of all time is Doctor Who, where, you have a blue box, you get into it, and then you can tell a story set at any time, anywhere in the universe, at any time in the universe. And you don't even have to be consistent because time can be changed so that things that appear to have happened haven't happened in other timelines. So it's just the most open-ended storytelling concept you could come up with. And when I thought about starting a new series, I wanted to do something that would allow me to write any kind of story. So the first book is set in a world it's a shaped world, but it seems to be a lot like ours to begin with some differences that soon crop up, like the big professional sport is lacrosse, and and the president lives in the Emerald Palace, not in the White House, things like that. But otherwise, it seems a little bit like ours. Then the second world, Master of the World, the one that came out in September, is a Jules Verne-inspired world. So it's got like submarines and weird airships and floating islands. So it's very steampunkish. And the third one that I'm writing now, I'm about 5,000 words from typing the end, is which is good because I have to turn it in this month. It's called The Moonlit World, and its working title in my head for a long time was Werewolves and Vampires and Peasants. Oh my! So it's that kind of world. And if we go on to number 4 after that, I'm currently thinking a kind of a Humphrey Bogart film noir, Maltese Falcon, gangster kind of a thing. So the whole premise was, in my mind, was largely the idea of being able to write any kind of story I might want to write, being able to have fun writing different kinds of stories, and also that idea of creators living inside their worlds. If I had to live inside the worlds I've shaped over the years, I might have shaped them a little differently. I wouldn't want to live in some of the ones I've come up with.
Yeah, I just there's so much dystopia in most of my worlds when I think about my own fiction.
Yeah, I've wiped out most of the population of Earth in one book, so
Oh boy, yeah, let's make it a little smaller for world maybe. So as far as your writing process goes, you like talking about writing process. Let's get into it. What kind of approach do you take to writing? Do you outline heavily? How do you get started with a story?
Well, at this point, I'm selling books to DAW based on a synopsis. So I have to do a synopsis first. I have to do something that this is what I want to write. What do you think? And for example, I have a couple of ideas right now that I have to do that to for the next things. So my synopsis typically is maybe 7,000 words or so. So that works out to 20 pages, or no, maybe not that, 15 25. Pages. Yeah, it depends on how I space it.
Yeah.
So they're fairly lengthy and fairly detailed. And then, of course, they don't actually necessarily bear a lot of resemblance, especially when you get towards the end of the book, to what I put in the synopsis. But it's enough to show what I'm going to work from. And then I just start and I write sequentially, and one sentence after another. And next thing you know, you have 100,000 words.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I've been doing epic fantasy recently. That's kind of my current series is epic fantasy. And so for me, it's like, oh boy, I'm trying to do 100, 150,000 sometimes. 120, 150,000. And do you ever have trouble with the length of a book? Do you have trouble hitting a target or overflowing words sometimes?
I was just thinking about that today. I wrote a 5-book young adult series, and every one of them came in at almost right on 60,000 words. And it wasn't like I struggled to make that happen. It just came out. And this one was contracted at 100,000 words, which is what I always aim at. And sure enough, it's going to be a little over, I think, but they're not worried about that. Sheila Gilbert, who's my editor at DAW, the Hugo Award-winning editor, Sheila Gilbert, at DAW Books, says, the story has to be the length that it is. I presume that's within reason, and if I turned it into a 500,000-word book, that would be a problem. I come in at about 100,000, and then typically when I get editorial comments back from Sheila, it often results in a longer book because she wants more development of ideas or characters or more explanation of things that maybe I glossed over but needed to be looked at more deeply. So I'll often add another few thousand words in the revision process. But coming in right at around 100,000 words, that just seems to be what I do now, because this is my the new one will be my 11th novel for Daw, and they've all been, except for one that was 150,000, they've all been at around that 100,000 mark, and it's just kind of ingrained in my head now. I think
100,000 is a good length, though. It's not like you're getting too much. It depends on the story, obviously. I mean, that's a big factor. But I think it's a good length to read in general. That's what I'm mostly talking about.
Yeah, and that's just, it's just what you're contracted at, and it can be a little under, it can be a little over, it can be quite a bit over. I think some of them have been more like 120,000 after the revision process. And Magebane, which I think was contracted at 100,000, that was one written under pseudonym Lee Arthur Chain, if anybody wants to go looking for it. That one came in at 150,000. That's the longest thing I've written.
Ooh, yeah. I've written a couple books that long, but it's still kind of a big effort, I mean, it feels bigger when it's a longer book, but you know what I mean? Do you have trouble ever with with a longer book like that? Does it feel more difficult than just being more words, or how does that work for you?
Magebane was interesting because most of my books have been, well, that's not true, so I won't even say that. But Magebane had multiple characters, maybe a few more viewpoint characters than I sometimes use, and that helps with the length, because once you start giving other people's views of things, it starts to expand. I'm looking at you, George R. R. Martin. But for example, I had a trilogy called The Masks of Agrima, which was entirely single viewpoint all the way through. So that one, if I'd had to expand that to longer length, I think a single viewpoint book to a long length might be a little more difficult than a multiple viewpoint book. The current ones are interesting because there are 3 viewpoint characters. One is we don't get much into his head. He's the bad guy. There's this sort of mysterious guide character who's a third-person character named Carl Yatzer, who shows up and tells my main character she's one of these shapers. And then Shauna Keyes, who's the main character, is a first person. So I write, the bulk of the book is in first person with a few third-person sections thrown in. So that's kind of unusual for me. But yeah, whenever you add an extra viewpoint character, it tends to add complexity and length.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, I've definitely encountered that. Actually, probably the longest, it's funny because actually the longest book I've written was a single viewpoint book, though. It's kind of weird now that I think about it. And that's why I broke up into multiple stories, though, because it kind of was just multiple arcs, and I wrote it as one book.
I guess I haven't written a long one from a single viewpoint, so to me it feels like that would be, I don't know. I'm sure.
It's different. It's different than what you're describing, but it's more like
viewpoint you've chosen.
Yeah, exactly. Just I think it's probably worse to have a viewpoint that's kind of wasted than one that's developed. Than just make one that makes the book longer, right? And I feel like I'm wasting a point of view when when I'm done with the rough draft and I look back and I'm listening, this point of view really needs a fix, because nothing's happening there. And that happens from time to time. Or this one just feels like there was a potential and I didn't go there, Well,
I've talked to authors in my podcast that, at least, who was it? Maybe it was Garth Nix, actually, in one of his early books. One of his early books, there was an editor that said to him, this viewpoint character doesn't actually do anything and doesn't really need to be in the book. And he was sort of, oh, no, you're crazy. What? And then he went back and looked at it and he said, oh, you're absolutely right. So sometimes it takes an outside person to show us what we've missed or should have had in there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I definitely really enjoyed working with the editors I've worked with, all of them, of course, freelance. But it's and beta readers too. People swear by those as well, and I'm not a huge proponent of them myself. But having a first reader is not a bad idea either.
Yeah,
especially if you don't have a contract and an editor professionally looking at it.
It's probably because I had nobody around me to do that when I started writing as a teenager, very much. And so I've just never had, my first reader is my editor.
Yeah, I don't really have a whole lot of readers around me either, but at least not the people who read the kind of fiction I write.
And one of the things that, as writer in residence, I'm actually, in a way, I am their people's first reader in some cases. They want to come in and get an opinion from somebody that hopefully has some level of expertise. And so I'm helping some people and we won't have time to go through an entire novel because I'll only look at 3,000 words at a time. And I'm only there for 9 months. So even if they come in every week, you don't get through an entire novel in that time. not if it's a long novel. But still, I'm helping people with big chunks of novels. They come in almost every week, and we talk through it. So, and I think I learned a lot from looking at other people's writing, too. And I think editors who are also writers learn a lot from editing other writers.
I can only imagine. I was just at a book it was a reading, a book launch up in the Twin Cities. I live in Minnesota, and my buddy there is an editor, or he I guess former editor now. I don't think he does that professionally anymore, but he was an editor, and he's also it was his book he was launching, and that was pretty cool. But I haven't talked with him a few times. My shout out to Reinhardt if he's listening, but he is definitely very, he said something very similar. It helps you analyze your own work by seeing what other people do in a given situation, or with a premise, whatever, all sorts of.
I often tell the people who come in that, it's important to read in the genre you want to write in, but one reason for that is because all writers are trying to solve the same problems of storytelling. And you see how other people solve those problems of how to provide necessary information, keep the action moving, build character, all dialogue, all that stuff. We're all trying to deal with the same situations. And when you edit somebody else's stuff, you have to read it really, really closely, far more closely than when you're just a reader. And I really think that marking up other people's manuscripts, I hope, is helping me when it comes time to mark up my own.
Oh yeah, I bet it is. I just gonna go out on a limb and say I'm pretty sure that'll work out in that way, because getting a different perspective on the craft is valuable in its own way. When I was an English major, when I was studying in college, it actually did give me a different perspective, and now I'm beginning to appreciate it more as I get older. But at the time, I was like, no, this is just frustrating me. It's annoying me that I have to look at it this way. But I think it might have actually been valuable recently. So
I do sometimes feel I'm telling people to do what I say, not what I do, because I'll mark something. I think, if you go back into that book of mine, I'm pretty sure I actually did exactly what I just told you not to do. But
live and learn. It's one of those things. Especially because it sounds like you've got quite a few books under your belt at this point.
A total of nonfiction and fiction together is well over 60.
Oh yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. I write a lot of nonfiction as well. I started as a newspaper reporter. Journalist, and when I went full-time freelance 26 years ago this fall, for the first few years it was all nonfiction because I wasn't selling anything. I'd sold a few short stories, but I wasn't selling books. So yeah, I've anything for a buck. Actually, I'll write anything. Anybody need any writing? Give me a call. I'll be happy to talk.
We'll write for cash. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, you're running a little low on time now, but so tell people where they can find your work and what books they should be looking out for from you in the future.
All right. Well, you can hopefully find me in bookstores. You should be able to. You can find me, of course, on any online bookstore, Edward Willett. You can find all my books listed at my main website, which is edwardwillett.com. And the latest series is called Worldshapers. The first book was Worldshaper. The second book, which just came out in trade paperback in September, is Master of the World. Those are both also out in audiobook. Master of the World will be out in mass market paperback. Oh, they're in ebook too, of course. Mass market paperback in probably around August, and then book 3, The Moonlit World, will come out in August of next year. And between now and then, I have my own little press called Shadowpaw Press, Shadowpaw, all one word, shadowpawpress.com. And I hope to have I'm hoping to kickstart an anthology featuring some of the guests from my first year of the Worldshapers. Some of those big names have said they will write stories for me, so I'm hoping that happens. And I might also do a nonfiction book with some of the information I've gotten that podcast about the writing process. And I'll probably have some of my fiction coming out through Shadowpaw Press that I published myself. So go to my website, edwardwillett.com, edwardwillett.com. That's the best way to find everything.
Wonderful. And yeah, the rock on. You get an anthology with people like Garth Nix in there. I mean, Garth Nix was a favorite of mine when I was younger.
Well, he's a second-year guest, so if the first-year guests work out, I'll do an anthology of the second-year guests later on.
Fair enough. We'll have to wait for that one.
B. Modest Jr. have said they'll write me a story, and Tanya Huff and people like that, Shannon McGuire have. So
good list already you got there.
Yeah, I hope the Kickstarter flies. I hope to launch it in January, probably.
Well, keep your eyes peeled for that, folks. And thanks for listening, everybody. As for this podcast, you can find more of it at mentalcellarpublications.com. And that's a cellar like a basement, so it's with a C. And you can also find all my books on Amazon.com. The latest of them is still Demon Scroll, but hopefully by the end of January, we'll be looking at Shadow Prince, the sequel, being out. It should be out way before the end of January. But, let's lower expectations a little bit, because this is going to be a big, fat book, and I have a lot of editing to do still. So thanks for listening, everybody. Have a good one.
That tears it.